Hey y'all, this is Professor Steve from Grand Canyon University, and I'm here today to walk you through the steps of installing Windows Server 2012r2. At this point, I've already gone through configuration of VMware. In this particular instance, I'm using VMware Fusion. However, the steps to install Server 2012 would be the same on both sides. A couple notes. One thing to point out is that for ITT 121, the system administration class, you're essentially going to have two virtual machines running a Windows server and like a Windows 10 or another Windows server, depending on what you want to do. The assignments that have to do with DHCP require that your VMware Fusion be set up in a host-only mode. Now, the problem with host-only mode is that you won't be able to access the internet, but in this particular instance, since it is a lab environment, that's not something that's should be really critical. So, in VMware Fusion, if you click on the little wrench there and then go to network adapter, so I've set my network configuration private to my Mac. In Windows, it's called host-only mode. So something to make sure you're aware of there. This essentially makes your VMs, virtual machines, or VM for short, to talk to each other without actually interfacing with the rest of the world or your other machines. So the other thing to note is to make sure that under processors and memory, make sure you've got about 2 gigs of memory set aside for your virtual machine and 2 processor cores. If you do 1 processor core, your system's going to be really slow whenever you're trying to run these. So 2 is usually pretty good. Make sure that also that you don't overutilize memory. So what this right here is telling me is that my Mac has 16 gigs of RAM in it. Because I've assigned 2 gigs of memory to it, it's deducted that. So you don't want to ever overuse your memory. You want to make sure that if you've got 8 gigs of RAM in your machine, do 2 gigabytes for each of the virtual machines, assuming you're going to run 2 of them, and then that way your system has 4 gigs of leftover. So enough of that. Let's jump in real quick here and get this process started. So what we knew is, like I said, I've already got this set up to run. So we're going to hit play, and it's going to load the file. Sometimes you may have to do press a key to press any key to boot the CD or DVD, and you just press spacebar, really any key, but just want to interrupt that boot process to start us down this road. So once we're in here, we're just going to walk through this really quick. So assuming we want English, and US is next, and we'll hit install now. And it's going to think about a few things real quick here. At this point, it's asking for the key. Now, you would have gotten this whenever you downloaded the ISO file from on the hub. You'll be given a key. It's 25 characters long, and once you type that in, hit next, and I'm going to do that, and I'll be back when I hit next. Okay, so I typed in my product key and hit next, and this is the screen that comes up next. So there's 2 types of installations: server core and server with a GUI, or graphical user's interface. So if you do the server core installation, you're essentially making a machine that is run entirely by command prompt. So you have to know the commands, PowerShell, anything like that, but you don't have any graphical interface or very, very little graphical interface. In this class, we're going to definitely do a server with a graphical user interface, or GUI, and then hit next. We're going to accept the terms and conditions. Bunch of legalese there. And on this window, I always do the custom one, especially if this is a brand new install. I almost never use the upgrade, install, and keep your files and settings. You certainly can do that, especially if you're going from like a Windows 8 to a Windows 10 type of thing. But so we're going to do a custom. Right now it's telling me that my size of my drive is 60 gigs. As a point, you could always make that smaller if you want. Since we're in a lab environment, 30 or 40 gig would be more than enough. In this case, we'll just do new. So you can either do next or new, either way, but I just do a new and apply. And I'm going to hit OK on this. It's basically saying, hey, it's going to create a few extra partitions in here. In this case, it just made one. This could be depending on my system as opposed to yours. And then we're going to hit next, and it's going to start the install process. It's basically installing all your files to the local disks, installing features and updates, and then we'll finish up and do a restart. So I'll be back here shortly once the installation is ready to be restarted. Okay, looks like it's just about finishing up here. And right now it's either going to restart by itself, or I can click on restart now and that will force it to. So we'll just do that. And it'll restart it, and when it comes back up, you notice it won't do the loading files thing like it did to begin with. It's doing its spinny circles there, and it's basically getting the system ready. You'll see on your setups, it'll go to like a getting devices ready, so some configurings and things like that. And then once it's finished, here it should come up to a screen that will ask for the administrator password. One thing to note on that is to make sure that you make note of that password. Don't lose it. I don't have the ability to reset that password for you should that issue ever happen. So you could at least make a notepad document or something to that effect that will allow you to keep those passwords handy just in case. So here I'm going to specify the password. Make sure I type that correctly. Don't want to have any accidents. And once you're done, hit finish. It's going to finalize the settings depending on the type of hard drive that you're running this on, whether it be a solid state, a spinning disk, or an external drive. It could take a little bit. So, all right. So once you're done in here, you're at a Control-Delete screen. And what you need to do, in at least the Mac side, is go up to virtual machine and you can do send Control-Delete. If you're on a Windows machine, if you hold down Control-Alt and press the Insert button, that will send the Control-Delete commands into your virtual machine. If you do Control-Delete on a Windows machine from the Windows machine, it'll actually trigger the Control-Delete on your host machine, not the virtual machine. So not a big deal, but just something to make note of. Type the password I already made in there. And then we're good to go in here. First thing that always comes up here is the server manager. And then life is good. So because we set this thing to host only, or in this case, only connected to the Mac, I do have a little exclamation down here over the network icon. So that's not a big deal. Again, this is a lab environment. You don't have anything really crazy going on. So if you go to the local server here, a few things to point out. The computer name here. This is actually the name of the computer itself, not just a description of like what I named VMware or the VM inside VMware. So this guy could say GCU instructor server VM, something like that. It's just a description. That is not the computer name. That's just a description of what this thing is. If you hit change, then computer name, this is where you actually assign the name of the computer. Always beneficial to give it a clever name, something that will differentiate it between other servers that are on your network. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to give my computer name, I'll just name it, well, again, I'll name it GCU Instructor SRV. Now, I'm doing this for a very important purpose because it's to show you that if I give it a name that long, or anything more than what they say 15 bytes or 15 characters, NetBIOS, which is the original version of DNS, not as used anymore, but basically can only handle 15 characters. So just pointing this out, that try to keep your computer names 15 characters or less. Not a big deal if you're not using NetBIOS, but if you are, it will be a problem. And it's going to say, computer name changes require a reboot. In this case, I'm going to change this before I do a reboot, but because I still have that ability. Notice that my domain and workgroup are grayed out because I still need a reboot at this point. So I'm going to change this to instructor SRV, keeps it under that 15 character limit. Again, it's going to tell me that we need a reboot, and then I can click close. And you have the option of doing a restart now or later. In this case, I'm going to do a restart later. A couple other things to point out in here. IE Enhanced Security Configuration. This is really a security feature for Internet Explorer that if you wanted to be sure that anybody that was going to the interwebs on a server, that they were well prompted that was the case, but it does protect against potential attacks. From here, I always just turn off administrators and leave users on. That way, the admins, you're the ones that usually really know what they're doing anyway. So click OK. And then the product's not activated, which is not a big deal. Again, in the lab environment, I'm not too terribly worried about that. IP addressing, I want to go ahead and change that. If I right click on the, I call it the computer with the pitchfork next to it, not really a pitchfork, but it kind of looks like that. Open Network and Sharing Center, and then I do change adapter settings. So here is the network adapter. If I right click and do status, and I do details, it's going to tell me it's got a 192.168. Well, this is the DHCP address. .38.128 is this machine. So these are automatically assigned because of the host-only mode type of thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to an address that I know and can easily remember. 192.168.0.10. Default mask is 255.255.255.0, and the default gateway is 192.168.0.1. And the DNS server, this system or server is going to be the DNS server for the two computer network, essentially, that we're doing in the lab. Because it is the DNS server, I'm going to set the preferred DNS server to be itself. 168.0.10. And then when we make another system, call it the workstation, I'm going to set the IP address to be .15 for the IP address. However, I am going to specify the preferred DNS on the workstation to be .10 because I want all DNS requests to come back to this primary server so that DHCP works and DNS works correctly. So OK and close, and at this point the system does need a reboot to make the computer name change as well as any kind of networking updates there. So that's pretty much it as far as installing Windows Server 2012r2 start to finish type of thing. And we'll be back for another video for installing Windows 10. So see you next time.